Chapter 301, Bulgarian Ministry Attacked. Tuesday, July 30, 1996, Oval Office, White House, Washington. United States of America. Bill Clinton didn't like what the report was saying. If this was true, there would be an additional threat to the economy, which neither he nor Radner had even thought about. The message was a report from a certain George W. Bush, governor of Texas. This man appeared to have inherited his father's political ability and was well on his way to become a viable candidate for the presidency. Many people thought that the Texas governor would be a viable candidate for the 2000 election. Only time would tell, he thought. Governor Bush was reporting that a woman had sued her employer because she had been unexpectedly laid off after many years of service. While any layoff was a tragedy, particularly in the post-Judgment Day economy, such events were commonplace and normally would not have come to the attention of the governor. This case, however, was different. The employer had replaced the plaintiff, and two other people with a Wizarding Services Corporation wizard who would be able to perform all three roles through magic at a lower salary than the three Muggles had drawn. Bush had argued that WSC was overstepping its boundaries here. For one thing, wizards should be used for magical tasks and not waste their power on things which could be done by Muggles. More troubling, however, was the simple fact that once this became public knowledge, everyone would start hiring WSC wizards to replace their Muggles. Within a matter of months, unemployment would skyrocket to 10% or more, and Eric Street would almost certainly be a multi-billionaire. Thank God only one in 10,000 people was a wizard. No job would be safe, even supposedly indispensable ones such as doctors and public servants. After all, who knew what the wizards would be able to pull off with magic? Worst of all was the possibility that Eric Street could be overthrown by a dark wizard who could take control of WSC and hold the Muggle world hostage simply by denying them access to the services they were familiar with, police, fire, and so forth. Yes, Street had admitted that he had sworn all 6 Eyes Said I oaths and was trustworthy. However, people were slowly finding out that Eyes Said I oaths, particularly the one against lying, put a wizard in awkward situations from time to time where people could take advantage of him. Bush and his father had both recommended that Street, who thankfully was a citizen of Texas and subject to the younger Bush's jurisdiction, issue a decree that wizards couldn't take Muggles' jobs. Thankfully, Street supposedly was thinking about it. Furthermore, Shauna Santana, the head of the Big Thicket facility, a supporter of WSB, and supposedly the woman in charge of Street's area, was putting him under heavy pressure to endorse the change. The problem was that even if Street instituted the new restriction, it was unlikely that it would apply retroactively to Teresa Cromwell's case. That particular WSC wizard, along with any others who had already thought of this idea, would likely still get to keep their jobs unless the lawsuit forced their new employers to dismiss them. This was going to be big news once this leaked out. Hopefully Street, Cromwell, and the employer would settle out of court. If it didn't, however, people would be discussing it everywhere and protesting on behalf of Cromwell. However, according to the bylaws as he knew them, the WSC employee had done nothing illegal and had a very strong case. Clinton shook his head. Even if Cromwell won and Street did change the policy for WSC employees, would it only apply to new employees? Would Street force other employees who had taken Muggle jobs to resign? The president didn't know, and he didn't really want to find out. An odd thought occurred to him. The election was still in a little over 3 months. He wanted to win re-election, of course. However, he couldn't help but admit that he wouldn't have minded dropping everything into Bob Dole's lap come January. Ministry of Magicrum Tower Bajidar, Castle, Bulgaria. Minister of Magic Victor Oberlansk had debated long and hard about opening the Ministry of Magic to Muggle tourism. However, he had eventually given in. It was only a matter of time until they found out where it was anyway. Besides, The American Ministry of Magic had opened its headquarters to tourism, and there hadn't been any incidents. Yes, America for Humans had destroyed the complex. However, they would have been able to do so even without the tourist program. All the terrorists had needed was the location. The location of the Ministry of Magic in Sofia was out now, of course. There wasn't anything he could do to rein that back, in short of sending out hordes of Oblivators, which would not be a good idea in this political climate. It was time to make the best of things, he thought. For the most part, however, the tour had been peaceful. Most of the wizards who worked in the ministry were as curious about the Muggles as the Muggles were about the wizards, and there were a few helpful people who served as translators for both sides. The house elves who had been holed up in Barjadar Castle all these years were fairly popular as well. He had been Minister of Magic for the past 5 years, ever since Stanislav Drakel was selected to become Deputy Headmaster of Durmstrang. He had done what he could to keep everything under control during Judgment Day, and he had been adamant that the main tower be named after fallen hero, athlete, and namesake Victor Crumb. So far, he seemed to be doing a decent job. The wizards were starting to give him more respect, and the community was starting to prosper again. There were strange rumblings going on Ukraine. No one really knew what was going on, but it looked like someone was trying to stuff the ballot box for the lottery for Muggle openings in Atlantis. He figured it had something to do with the Celestines, who were getting increasingly belligerent now that Samuel was back. That's just what the world needed, he thought. Celestines wreaking havoc on Atlantis. The latest tour had begun with a bit of a complication. Apparently someone had managed to try to bring a gun into the castle, and the entire group had been thrown into confusion. Thankfully, the auras had whisked him away and interrogated him. Apparently the man had been half asleep. This was an 8:00 p.m. tour, after all, and had forgotten to check the firearm at the security checkpoint. He was midway through his paperwork. Hopefully he'd be done by 9:00 when he heard a tremendous explosion far beneath him. What the hell was that? Seconds later, the tower he was in began shaking violently, and he was forced to invoke an emergency spell to strengthen it to make sure it didn't come down. There was only one thing he could think of. Someone or something had detonated a bomb in the Ministry of Magic. This was not good at all. He had to figure out what was going on and keep everything under control. Dropping his work on his desk, he apparated down to the main entrance and nearly found himself trampled by people, both Muggles and wizards, running out of what had once been the main audience chamber and had been transformed in the headquarters of Bulgarian Ministry of Magic. He grabbed one of them to ask her what was going on and was rewarded by a kick in the leg. The minister went down as the woman ran, screaming, out of the building. Amplifying his voice with the sonorous spell, he told everyone to stay put and that he was coming in. Shoving people out of the way, he forced his way into the main audience chamber. The place was an absolute mess. Body parts had been sprayed all over the building, and cauldrons had spilled their contents on the flagstones. Part of the roof had caved in, and a huge fire in the corner of the room had sprung up when 2 potions intermixed in a way that they shouldn't have. He scanned the room and saw at least 3 dead and 10 wounded. Summoning all the auras, he hurried to the nearest injury victim and asked him what had happened. The man winced in pain, but responded. One of the people shouted something in a bizarre language and suddenly blew up. Then everything went to hell. Was it a Muggle or a wizard? Muggle, I think, though I suppose you could have had a wizard disguised as a Muggle ow. What are you doing? Obelansk was furious. How did? He answered his own question. The attackers had executed a classic maneuver to get around security. Have an accomplice set off the security detector and sneak the primary weapon into the building in the chaos. Who did it? He promised himself that he would get to the bottom of this as soon as possible. Bella Vista birding resort outside of Quitoquado. David Hendrickson didn't know much Spanish. However, he knew enough to get by. Besides, There were enough American birders here that he could speak English from time to time. He was posing as a chemistry professor named Harley Lamar, who enjoyed birding as a hobby. As far as he could tell, he had managed to escape with his precious philosopher's stone. He was out of Mr. Green's clutches for the time being. There were times where he had pondered using the stone to heal injuries the fellow birders had taken during their expeditions. One man had hurt his leg when he fell off a tree branch. He had to be careful, however. For all he knew, one of these people could be a spy for Atlantis. In the meantime, however, he'd enjoy himself. He knew now not to use the stone frivolously, but using it for good purposes sure beat not using it at all. That poor woman who had been hit by the car outside the office could have died had it not been for him. Furthermore, he had seen all of the poor people in slums outside Quito and figured that they needed some charity as well. Teiji Shimuro District, Wakyamajapan. Naboru Kamitani's afternoon sleep was disrespectfully interrupted by the shouting of his firstborn. "Father, father, wake up. We're going to the drive hunt." Opening an eye, he grunted. "Kuroki, you idiot, it's the middle of summer. There is no drive hunt till September. Now leave me alone to rest my old bones." But this had little effect on his insolent offspring. "There is one, just now. A huge pod of dolphins was sighted nearby, thousands of them. Come, see Mr. Hidaka if you don't believe me." "Right, I believe if you say so," came the grumpy response. "But mark my words, boy, that much dolphins this early is not natural." Of course, Kuroki could not be disheartened this easily. "Oh, come on, father, don't look the gift horse in the mouth. We'll have fresh meat at last. Come." Later, at the sea near Teiji, the small fleet of fishing ships cautiously moved between the huge swarm of dolphins and the open sea, trying not to spook them prematurely. The animals have been acting strangely, or rather, stupidly. Jumping out of the water and just congregating in a mass of thousands, but apparently doing nothing but attracting attention, writing their own death sentences. And to think that some gaijin actually believe these things are as smart as a human. "They should see this," said Kuroki to no one in particular. "Well, they might be just as smart as them," remarked his father with a grin. The untold amount of meat swimming in the water cheered the old man up, even made him forget his pains for a time. Down under the mass of bottlenose dolphins, one of them approached a solitary figure of a merperson. He was a sight to behold. His skin tone, wherever the extensive tattoos covering his upper body, let that show, a grayish pink, his braided hair pale green, the result of generations of crossbreeding between all three merpeople subraces. Despite being of smaller than average build and not really muscular, the hybrid held himself with great confidence with the posture of an unbeatable champion or a demigod among mortals. The creature held a cage in his hand, with several silvery fishes inside. The dolphin's shape wavered, then it wasn't a dolphin anymore. In its place, a siren woman floated with her head bowed. Without turning, the male said in Gulliver, "Speak, my lord Cerbers, there is no sign of more Muggle ships. Your warriors are in position." "We stand ready." The mermaid's voice was quivering in fear. Not dignifying her with a response, he opened the cage and sticked his hand inside, caressing a fish. The Ramora, for all its power, sensed that he was its superior and bore his touch without a flinch, subjugating itself, letting the being dominate its body and mind. It happened too quickly. In one moment, Kuroki was standing in the boat, watching the oblivious cetaceans playing in the calm water. In the next, the sea appeared to shudder, and huge waves appeared out of nothing, throwing the boats left and right. Then something inexplicable happened. The sea calmed again, as if the moment of storm was merely a fragment of its imagination. Except, around the boats, it did not cease. It increased. In a few seconds, 5-meter-high waves washed over the deck of their tiny ship, and though he managed to grasp a rope, he saw he'll end up in the water one way or the other. The boat started to fill. Wildly looking around, he saw that the rest of the fleet is struggling with the same problem. For some reason, reminding him of gaijin cartoons, where miniature, personalized storm clouds gathered over the heads of angry people. Then another, even bigger wave tore the rope from his hand and swept him from the boat. Seeing that he ended up just at the edge of the storm, he tried to swim to calm water. But then, he suddenly felt hands grabbing his feet and pulling him under. Struggling with eyes closed, he felt a fist punching him in the stomach, and when he reflexively exhaled, some disgusting material was shoved into his mouth. Opening his eyes in shock, he saw men and women with the lower bodies of giant fish, holding him down, keeping a hand on his mouth so he couldn't spit. He hears a strange chanting, which somehow calmed him down, though he still had the thought that he'll drown in a minute. One of them did something to his neck that made himself swallow the foul thing involuntarily. Looking around, he saw his father plunge into the water as their boat surrendered to the sea's onslaught, and he could see other fishermen further away in the same situation. Then he began to notice a curious lack of the usual asphyxiation. Despite being underwater, his lungs didn't burn for air. He had an overwhelming desire to open his mouth and breathe water instead. The one holding its hand on his mouth finally let him go, and he inhaled. And to his surprise, it actually worked. His hands also felt strange, but when he tried to examine them, he realized the creatures still held him down. And now, after one of them barked an order in some sing-song language, they started to drag him down to the seabed. Suddenly, a terrifying thought came to him. What if these creatures are the dolphins they saw? What if they came here to seek revenge for the countless dolphins slaughtered by his people? Cape Verde Ministry of Magic Prayer Cape Verde. Minister of Magic Nazareno Delgadillo had a problem. His auras brought in a couple of trespassers. By itself, this wouldn't have been a problem. Other than a lack of common courtesy, wizards usually didn't find any problems with surprise visits into each other's airspace in peacetime. However, this time the intruder almost caused a catastrophe when his vehicle had a near miss with a Muggle airplane, disturbing its various devices. To make matters worse, the Muggles detected it despite being covered in a disillusionment charm and effectively hunted it down on their own. Luckily, his own auras arrived there in time and taken over the situation. As it turned out, the intruders were from the hidden nations, which would have made an interrogation by Muggles unfortunate, to put it mildly. Of course, things didn't go easily after that. The wizard and the witch cooperated, sure, but they didn't speak Portuguese or even decent English. That was solved, though, when they realized the girl spoke French, just like one of the ministry's handful of employees. They had been appropriately horrified when they learned about the tragedy they almost caused, and all in all seemed to be honest and harmless people. Still, with the almost accident, he had to come up with something that satisfies the Muggles too. The spell's effect made him wonder. Being quite familiar with flight and aerodynamics, playing Quidditch for years in the Lisboa Letherfolds in his youth, he actually had some theories how could that boat speed up so much and what happened to the repelling charm. But it needed to be tested so they could make sure it never happens again. Also, the Muggles were curious about the flying vehicle and wanted to test a number of things he didn't ever think about. The boat had to stay. The couple currently in front of him, however, were better off far from his country as soon as possible. Through his interpreter, he said his verdict. To cover the repairs on the Muggle airplane, I confiscate your boat. However, you're free to buy another one and continue your journey on two conditions. 1, you do it quickly. 2, you see to it that this won't happen again. You either fly low or get a radio. Looking into his eyes, the Vila said her thanks in her sweetest voice. Somehow, in the end, she made him offer them a radio for free, as a gift for dropping by and dispelling their boredom. Later that day, when one of his auras reported that a house elf joined the pair when they were buying their replacement boat, the minister wasn't really surprised. In fact, he was still thinking about the negotiations with the Vila. Damn, she's good. God help anyone who will have to haggle with her. Chapter 302. William enrolls at Hogwarts. Wednesday, July 31, 1996, Windsor Castle, Berkshire, England. Severus Snape stared at Princess Diana. Hard. Absolutely not, Your Highness. Princess Diana frowned. Why not, Headmaster? Training to be a wizard is an extremely difficult and dangerous undertaking, Your Highness. Unless someone is very skilled at what they are doing, they are putting themselves at risk of injuring themselves or worse. Diana fumed. I've told him about this several times, Headmaster, and he's willing to take the risk. He'd already convinced me to let him serve in the armed forces when he grows up. How is this any different? Snape grunted. A soldier knows what he is getting into when he joins the army. His Majesty has no idea what awaits him once he enters the doors of Hogwarts Castle. Furthermore, if what you are saying is correct, he may be able to cast spells, but will not be able to see what he's doing in some cases, because of the lack of this Z-complex. That makes him a danger to us and to himself, and I cannot allow that, especially when we are dealing with the King of England. Diana pressed on. But he's already a fan of Hermione Granger, and he's actually met her, Ron Weasley, and Harry Potter. Surely they will be able to tutor him. After all, both Harry and Hermione also come from Muggle backgrounds. One look at the headmaster's face forced the Queen Mother's mouth shut. Clearly, Snape did not like any of those students. Harry had mentioned something about Snape being a harsh teacher during one of the interviews with J.K. Rowling, but he hadn't provided many details. Snape drew a deep breath, as if he couldn't believe he was saying, Your Highness, we have ample evidence that the Muggle-born wizards and Muggle-raised wizards can become as proficient in the art as people with one or two wizarding parents. Although I personally think that Miss Granger is an arrogant know-it-all, I freely confess that she is the most gifted witch in Harry's year. However, there are significant differences here. First and foremost is the simple fact that His Majesty would be entering Hogwarts with one hand tied behind his back, because of his lack of the Z-complex. He knows all that, Wizard Snape. He still wants to take the risk. He's your king, sir. What he says goes, if you think about it. Snape smiled. Yes, and as his subject, it is my duty to stop him if he is putting his life in danger. From what Dumbledore has told us, the teachers here are excellent. Didn't you teach here yourself at one point? Snape bit his lip, and Diana began to understand why Harry Potter disliked this man. Yes, Your Highness. I taught potions for many years. However, I must be frank. There has been a major shake-up in the staff here. Most of the experienced teachers, myself, Dumbledore, and McGonagall, are no longer in a position to teach class. It's possible that Dumbledore will return before the beginning of the school year and allow me to teach Pottians, but there is no guarantee that will happen. Dumbledore's fate rests in the hands of a certain David Hendrickson. Diana recognized the name, the man who stole the Philosopher's Stone. Exactly, Your Highness. The stone is an extremely powerful magical object, one which can be misused terribly if it fell into the wrong hands. You may be interested to know that the Dark Lord sought the stone at one point and nearly got his hands on it. Had he obtained the Philosopher's Stone, the results could have been ghastly. At any rate, back to the subject at hand. Many of the teachers this year are quite inexperienced, Your Highness. If there is one year when it would be inadvisable to admit His Majesty, it would be this one. Diana frowned. What about that Korean witch, Choi something? Wasn't she able to train a Q-only wizard to cast spells? Snape's face grew even more sour. Given the proper instructor and one with significant experience, it may be possible. However, I must advise you that A, from what I've been told, the witch you mention is dead, and B, even if she weren't dead, she almost certainly does not speak English. Diana wasn't convinced. She seemed to do a decent job, from what I was told. Snape gritted his teeth. She had the help of the South Korean Ministry of Magic, from what I've been told. With the capital hit with a nuclear blast and the two Koreas less than 24 hours away from a major referendum on reunification, I would argue that Seoul is a bit busy. Hermione's a bright girl, Maybe she can help. Snape nearly turned green. Miss Granger is a bright witch. However, she is quite inexperienced. Furthermore, it is unlikely that she and His Majesty would even spend enough time together to tutor her. Oh, why is that? Snape looked like he wanted to say something sarcastic and was forced to keep it down. Because Hogwarts has 4 houses: Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor. A 5th house, Black, is under construction. Students spend most of their time with those of their own house. The only way His Majesty would be able to spend a lot of time with Miss Granger would be if he were sorted into Gryffindor. Although that is a distinct possibility given His Majesty's bravery, it is not a sure thing. Furthermore, the possible romantic involvement between Miss Granger and His Majesty would likely attract undue attention and paparazzi, interruptions which could interfere with the education of our students. Diana nodded. It's understandable. However, we have no idea if Hermione is even interested in William. I suspect she isn't, since she's much older than he is, but I haven't told him that. Schoolboy crushes tend to be, well. Snape's eyes grew distant. Irrational. People can do stupid things when they are teenagers. Diana chuckled. Tell me about it. Boy, tell me about it. Snape winced and continued his report. There are also other issues as well. His Majesty would be entering Hogwarts at an unusual age. He would be placed in a first-year class where he would be 3 years older than everyone else. Being the big man in his class, in more ways than one, can inflate his ego, which is something a wizard, especially a king, does not need. I doubt he'd feel comfortable with all those children around them. Secondly, he could be teased by people of Slytherin house who look down upon Muggle-born wizards. Thirdly, even if Miss Granger does tutor her, what is he going to do in his 3rd year? Miss Granger is scheduled to graduate in the summer of 1998. Snape was pretty convincing, Diana thought. However, she couldn't get the story of the South Korean witch out of her mind. She tried a different tack. Has Hogwarts graduated any British royalty before? Snape nodded. Yes, Your Highness. I'm not at liberty to say who, though. Were any of them acting monarchs? Did any of them become king or queen later on? So why can't we admit William? Because they were full wizards with both Q and Z who were admitted with their Muggle classmates at age 11. They did not have any of these handicaps, and they were not reigning monarchs. At worst, they were heir to the throne. I'm sorry, but this isn't appropriate. Diana's mind raced. I have an idea. What happens if I, Head Minister Flame, will send some people to go to Korea to find whoever taught Choi, whatever her tricks? He really wants to go, and after all, he is your king. Snape thought for a long time. Finally, he sighed. This goes against my better judgment. However, if you find a knowledgeable tutor, if you find one, and we approve of him, then we'll admit him. Be advised, however, that he will be treated like any other student. He will be held to the same high standards as every single other person in this school. As soon as he steps in those doors, he will no longer be His Majesty. He will be Mr. Windsor, first-year Hogwarts student. Furthermore, if he does anything which puts him or anyone else in jeopardy, we will expel him immediately. We cannot risk the life of the reigning King of England. Diana stood and smiled, and Snape followed her. That's all I can ask for, Headmaster. That's all I can ask for. Snape bowed. That is all I can grant, Your Highness. School starts at the beginning of September. We have 1 month, so let's make the most of it. Chapter 303. Wiggle, Wiggle, Wiggle. Wednesday, July 31, 1996, Herald Green Pharmaceutical Corporation, Charleston, South Carolina, United States of America. The phone rang in Dr. Green's office. Would the interruptions ever cease? With the stone back in play again, he was busy. He picked it up irritably. Hello. Mr. Green, this is Henry McPhee from the security desk. We've got a bunch of people here from the Food and Drug Administration. They're here to conduct a surprise audit of the equipment and compounds used to produce Vitalix. Green's mind raced. The FDA wanted an inspection. Since when had they done unscheduled inspections of facilities, and why hadn't they done this earlier? Something here didn't make sense. Wary, he spoke into the handset. "McPhee, do they have badges? They could be spies from Merc or something like that." There was a delay of a minute or so on the other end of the line, followed by, "Yes, sir. They're authentic. Their badges check out as clean." Green cursed. Another damn bureaucratic visit. Weren't the paperwork and lawsuit enough of an obstacle to the success of the stone? Making a note of what he had been doing, he got up and walked down to the security desk. 3 men greeted him there, all dressed in professional business suits. One of them was carrying a briefcase, and another was carrying an odd-looking contraption that looked like the love child of a TV antenna and a microphone. The third was jotting down notes. The note-taker shook his hand. "Mr. Green, I apologize for the interruption, but there isn't much we can do about it. After all, the inspection has to be unannounced." Green grimaced as he watched the bizarre TV antenna wiggle up and down. "Since when have you started conducting surprise inspections like this?" The man shrugged. "Believe it or not, not as much as we should. Although technically it's on the books, many FDA people don't bother with it. Given the promise of Vitalix, however, we decided to make sure that we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's." The antenna wiggled in approval. Green didn't like this. He didn't want too many people to find out about the stone, and it was obvious he would have to bring them into the lab to show them all of the components which were needed to produce Vitalix. Well, he had already planned a cover story for the stone. He hoped Vasilov remembered his alibi. Shaking his head in disbelief, he told the FDA investigators to follow him into the building. The bizarre TV antenna bashed into his head every 20 feet or so, and he eventually spun around in irritation and pointed at the antenna. "If you don't mind me asking, Mr. Johnson, what in the name of creation is that?" The man holding that antenna chuckled. "It's a new device used to check for airborne toxins. There's been a bit of a boost in counterterrorism technology since the Quabin attack." "Can you put it away?" Antenna man shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but I need it out for the inspection. I'll try to keep it out of your way if you want." The antenna wiggled again, whacking Green on the head once more. "Please do, if you don't mind. I've already losing much of my hair, and I don't need this thing to knock off the rest of it." The man with the notebook stopped the tour momentarily when he saw a rack of radiation suits. Frowning, he asked what they were for. Green shrugged as the man with the briefcase opened it and ducked out of the way of the frantically bobbing TV antenna. "A pending project trying to cure radiation sickness. We have hay. What are you doing?" The man with the briefcase had just finished rubbing the radiation suit with a cloth and placing the cloth in an envelope in the briefcase. "We're taking a sample to figure out what compounds you've been experimenting with. Unless we're mistaken, you've probably got some radioactive waste on those gloves." For the first time in the entire session, that ridiculous antenna stopped moving. Green grunted. "Next time, warn me when you're going to do that. Some of this stuff is classified, and we want to make sure that nothing leaks out." Briefcase man nodded and closed the briefcase. "Of course, Mr. Green." They continued down the hall, and Green fretted as briefcase man copied papers and put them in the briefcase. Finally, they reached the lab, where the talented Ukrainian was working with the stone. Hoping this wouldn't be a disaster, Green drew a deep breath. "Dr. Vasilov, these are some agents from the Food and Drug Administration. They are conducting an unannounced survey of our facilities and making sure that we're preparing the Vitalix under proper conditions. Gentlemen, this is Dr. Dmitry Vasilov, our head chemist." Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Vasilov stared at the antenna for a second, as if he'd seen it before. Then he shook his head abruptly and began to speak. "Welcome, gentlemen. I apologize that this place is a bit of a mess, but you can probably understand that labs aren't always neat and tidy." Antenna man somehow managed to stabilize the antenna again. I understand, Dr. Vasilov. Are you working on the Vitalix right now? Yes, sir. Briefcase man approached the table. Can I see what you've got here? Vasilov looked at Green in alarm. Green didn't have much of a choice, however. If they figured out he was falsifying research documents and lying to the FDA, this stone project was going out the window. He closed his eyes and nodded. Vasilov moved out of the way and pointed out the various beakers and jars. These are various chemicals used to create Vitalix. For security measures, we call them Jar A, Jar B, and so forth. Briefcase man stepped forward. Would it be all right if I took samples of some of these substances for our inspection? Vasilov blinked and turned to Green for an explanation. They're taking samples of lots of stuff, Dmitri. I don't see what they're going to be able to do with it, and we need to make sure that they can't reproduce. Notebook man held up a hand. There are 13 jars here. I don't know what's in the jars, so let's go by my name and take 4 samples. Jars M, I, K, and E. That should be good enough for a spot test without compromising your secrecy any more than necessary. Vasilov fretted a minute, but moved out of the way as briefcase man took his samples. Once he was done, he pointed at the stone. What's that, Dr. Vasilov? I've never seen anything like that before. Green held his breath as Vasilov answered. A catalytic crystal which we use to speed up our reactions. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. The 3 agents conferred for a moment excitedly. Finally, briefcase man held out his hand. Something that could expedite reactions, could help many, many biology companies. I'm taking that too. We'll give it back, I promise. Vasilov eyebrows shot up. We need that, sir. We can't do our work without it. Notebook man looked around the room. Suddenly, his eyes stopped moving. Green turned to see what he was looking at, and his face turned white. Notebook man was staring at one of the 2 fake stones. Green had a bad feeling about this. Notebook man pointed. Don't worry, you can keep that one. Give me the one on the table. We need to use the one which you were using in the latest experiment to be consistent with the stuff recently taken from the jars. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Green was starting to hate that thing. Turning his eyes to Vasilov, he noticed that Vasilov was looking hard at the antenna again. Suddenly, his jaw dropped and he started shaking. Did Vasilov actually recognize the antenna? Was it a wizarding aid? Vasilov was starting to sound desperate, and Green knew why. If the stone left the building, Vasilov would be killed by the unbreakable vow, even thought he had not actually taken the stone out of the building. Ah, you may want to rethink that. This latest experiment was to check if the stone catalyst was actually working. I don't think it was. This wasn't a valid test, I'm afraid. Green whistled silently to himself. Would they get away with this? He turned to see all 3 men staring at the antenna, which was wiggling wildly. He turned to look back at Vasilov, who was sweating. He then mouthed something. Secrecy, censor it. Vasilov shut his mouth as the 3 FDA men turned back to him again. This is disturbing, Dr. Vasilov. If a randomly chosen catalyst doesn't work on this inspection, your Vitalix may not be as robust as we had hoped. Nevertheless, rules are rules, and we have to insist. I'm sorry. If it's any consolation, we'll be taking the bad one off your hands and leave you with all the equipment to make new ones. Good luck, gentlemen. And with that, briefcase man plucked the stone out of Vasilov's hand and put it in the briefcase. Vasilov, increasingly flustered, reached for his pocket, which held his wand. Antenna man's eyes widened, and he put down the rapidly vibrating antenna. He reached into his pocket, showed the wizard the butt of a gun. Don't be an idiot, Dr. Vasilov, or that will figure negatively in our report. And with that, all 3 of them left the room. Vasilov screamed at them to stop, but they didn't. Green tried to negotiate with them to swap stones, but they wouldn't. 5 minutes later, the encounter was over, and Green was standing over Vasilov's body. People were gathering rapidly and trying to figure out what happened. He really hoped he wouldn't be seen as a suspect. Haine Marques's Islands, French Polynesia. Netche was now a free Yahoo. And since he was a free Yahoo, he felt obliged to do what he could to escalate the budding Yahoo rebellion in the land of the Howihandnums. 2 exceeds 4 may have been decimated, but human heritage and the organization were now joining forces. There were protests going on all over the land, and many of the planations had been shut down by work stoppages. Here and there, Muggle aircraft would hover beneath the omnipresent rain clouds and to keep an eye on things. He had just received word that the flood of Yahoos had managed to overwhelm the natives, and in a few cases, convey enough information to turn the natives to their side. The natives, not surprisingly, had offered to provide support and relay the request up the chain of command. They had already taken Rach, the ambassador, hostage, along with most of his entourage. Rach kept on explaining that there had to be a way for the 2 groups to coexist, but no one was really paying any attention to him anymore. Netche watched carefully as a wizarding tribal shaman who had been living among the Muggles on the island took one of the Muggle tube weapons and cast Geminio on it. Now there were 2 such weapons. Netche didn't know much about how it worked, but from what he could tell, he pointed the tube at the enemy and pulled the little lever at the bottom. The weapon would then fire a powerful projectile at the enemy. The tribal shaman had been horrified to hear that the centaurs enslaved humans. He had shouted something in a very bitter tone when someone managed to tell him that the centaurs were going to enslave every human in the area, and that they had wizards as well. Netche watched as the man continued to cast his spells. By the time he was done, there were more than 1,000 tube weapons and more than 150,000 projectiles. He distributed them to the rest of the escaped Yahoos and showed everyone how to operate them. Without realizing what he was doing, Netche suddenly roared, "Nihim, here we come." Seconds later, the battle cry was picked up by virtually everyone else on the island. Within an hour, the Yahoos had flooded their way back across the border, this time with enough tube weapons to hopefully overwhelm a civilization which had never been exposed to such devices. Meanwhile, far above, a Muggle aircraft lifted off from the building with the long road in Hain and began flying towards the Centaurs, capital somewhere south of Japan Pacific Ocean. Even carried between 2 of the fishmen, Naboru Kamatani was really tired. After the strange mini-storm sank their fleet, and it really did, he saw the boats fall apart under the onslaught. The creatures dragged each of them down, forcing them to eat some magical substance that enabled them to breathe underwater. Unfortunately, there were casualties. Some of the whalers took too long to fall or jump from the boats and were injured by debris, and one of them actually had the presence of mind to draw a knife mid-dive and stab one of the creatures. Needless to say, he didn't live another minute. The monsters stabbed him with a dozen spears and knives at once. As soon as the magical food saved the humans from drawing, the fishmen stripped them naked and folded their clothing, putting it into bags and harnesses, and tied their limbs with rope. After that, the creatures grabbed them all, including the wounded and the dead, and took off as one at a hurried pace. They have been swimming ever since, only slowing down from time to time to feed the humans another dose of that weird stuff. They swam deep, near the seafloor to his human eyes. The darkness appeared to be impenetrable. After the first few hours, the fishmen began to sing, and Kami, it was rousing. He didn't understand the words, and even most of the sounds had no equivalent in human speech. But he felt as if his own body would be a musical instrument, feeling not only the rhythm, but somehow, he thought, the feelings and thoughts of the singers. He felt strength and stamina he didn't know he had, and judging by his captor's tireless pace, it had the same effect on them. A march, he realized. Looking around to try and see his son, he saw faint movement in the darkness all around and heard the march from every direction. Despite knowing that Kuroki fell into the water before him, and even catching a glimpse of the boy later, he worried for the kid. Hundreds of meters ahead of the prisoners, the tattooed merman led the way in silence. He never joined the choir even after so years spent with this tribe. He felt his accent was horrible, his singing voice untrained and crude. Not that any of his subjects would have dared to tell him. They feared him too much for that, and they were right to do so. Yet they followed him obediently, without complaint, and he showed them a way. At the moment, he did it literally, too. Using his powers, he willed the spear in his hand to glow with a bright light, illuminating the way for him and those following him. Of course, with his army numbering in the thousands, the light didn't reach the majority of them, but that's what the song was for. They arrived at last to a great chasm. For a moment, even he, the chosen one, great mage, favored of the ancestors, stopped to marvel in the sight. The continental shelf ended abruptly here, as if sliced by a gigantic knife. Down there, so deep that his makeshift lamp's light was hopelessly lost, before getting near the bottom, lay the abyssal plain. Not many of his kind braved that dark, barren wasteland. The tribes seldom ventured far from their established sources of nutrition, not to mention they didn't have much when it came to illumination. Or anything else, for that matter, he thought bitterly. Only the merpeople of his birthplace, the shining city of Rock-to-Rattle, launched expeditions there, looking for resources, both mundane and magical. Looking back to see his entourage caught up with him and waiting, he swam over the edge and began the descent. Naburo Kuroki shifted uncomfortably in the fishmen's grasp. Even without seeing anything in the darkness, he felt they are descending far too quickly to his liking. Even without air in his lungs, the increasing pressure threatened to damage his ears, and that hurt like hell. Just when he believed he couldn't take it any longer, the descent stopped, and his captors continued horizontally. Around him, faint dots of light appeared, growing stronger by the minute as they moved on, revealing a labyrinthine cave system. Several minutes later, they stopped, and he was unceremoniously shoved down beside several other fellow whalers, his collision with stone mercifully softened by being underwater. He felt relief wash over him as he spotted his father, alive and unharmed, among the men. Then he noticed something. The fishmen were conversing, and they used another language that sounded strangely similar to English. Listening in, he could understand some of it. "I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but compressed algae for a whole stinking day." Even if he didn't understand every word, the meaning was made obvious by the rumble erupting from the thin creature's belly. The others in the vicinity also sounded hungry. "Yeah, why can't we have some meat?" "What about them?" One lithe monster gestured in the captives' direction. "They look fresh." Kuroki's fears rose, then dispersed when they promptly burst into laughing. Though he could have sworn they looked at him. "They jest with us," he realized. The first one said, "But seriously, I could eat some meat." Did the others catch anything? The others winked together and said in a playful but reassuring tone, "It's your first raid with our beloved lord. Just wait and see." And here it comes. Right on cue, a dozen fishmen, or rather fishwomen, swam into their alcove, dragging ropes attached to the greatest tuna fish Kuroki had ever seen. The creature could barely fit in the cave, its size more fitting for a small whale than its own kind. Apparently it was killed recently, blood still oozing from a wound on its side. A wound that was apparently made by a very big stabbing instrument. No weapon wielded by man could have done that. One of the fishmen, the one who asked for meat before, appeared to be just as puzzled as the humans. However, before he could have asked a question, the others yelled, "Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys." And drawing huge knives from their harnesses, they lunged at the fish as one. Eyes glued to the feeding frenzy before him, Kuroki was startled as suddenly a female appeared in front of him, offering him stripes of raw tuna. "Eat, human. You must be hungry." Her voice was beautiful but disdainful. But she was right. He was hungry, and tuna meat wasn't that bad anyway. Whoever these creatures were, they wanted them alive. But for what purpose, he couldn't fathom. Chapter 304. Every Man Reflects. Thursday, August 1. 1,996,169, South Street, Waltham. United States of America. I stared in shock at the letter my landlord had left in the mailbox. Starting September 1st, My rent would be increasing from $775 a month to $975 a month. The landlord had claimed, what else, that the economy had taken a hit and he needed more money. Guess where he was going to get it from. Granted, I had a roommate, so I would only be hit with a $100 a month increase. Although I was fairly certain I would be able to handle it, it would be tricky. I had already taken a 10% pay cut and had been forced to cut back on many day trips, decorations for the apartment, and additional accessories for the telescope. I was praying that I wouldn't have to reduce the amount of money I was putting into my 401k. There were two major concerns. First, there was no telling if I would be able to keep my job. Although Matt Ender, the man who had claimed to be an elf, but had told me that they weren't planning on laying anyone off, that didn't mean that they would change their mind if the downturn continued. As a relatively new hire, I would likely be one of the first to go. Without a job, there was no way I would be able to pay for any of this. If all else failed, I could either resume my Ph.D. or move back in with my parents, if they would let me. The second was the possibility that I would be able to keep my job, but my roommate wouldn't be able to pay her share of the rent, and I wouldn't be able to find another roommate at such short notice. I deemed that to be unlikely, however. She never lived there, and her parents were paying the bills just to soothe their nerves that she had somewhere to live. I had already cut most of my magazine subscriptions, other than those to Scientific American and Sky and Telescope. Thank God that I was only a few months out of graduate school and not accustomed to living with a true salary yet. Trying to put the letter out of my mind, I turned on the TV and turned to the Olympics. There had already been several major upsets at the Games, and several little-known countries had won golds. However, the only major controversy had involved one of the hurdle races. The French competitor, who had been running second, had apparently been surprised by a bright camera flash in his face, tripped, and fallen over a hurdle. Everyone had gasped, and by the time the man had regained his composure, the race was over. Canada had won the gold, Egypt the silver, and Tunisia the bronze. The incident had been serious enough to convince the announcer to remind the fans to not try to distract the athletes during the competition. Although the footage clearly showed the camera flash in the man's face, I couldn't imagine how an elite athlete like an Olympian could succumb to distractions that easily. Things could have been worse, however. Rumors had emerged that a terrorist had planned to detonate a bomb in the stadium last Saturday. Thankfully, the Wizards had caught him in the nick of time, and the Muggles admitted that they likely would not have been able to thwart the attack without magical help. This was a clear case where the fall of the Statute of Secrecy had been beneficial. In other news, the British royal family was abuzz with the news that King William apparently had a latent ability to cast spells. This earth-shattering discovery had surprised both Muggles and Wizards, not to mention His Majesty himself. Princess Diana was shown to have Vela ancestry, a discovery which prompted even more people to take the Ziggurat Lab's genetic tests to see if they had unusual genes. The results of these additional tests had been even more amazing. Of the 20 or so members of the British royal family who had been whisked to the front of the line to take the test, no fewer than 6 had either the Q or Z genes. That was a 30% hit rate in a test where random chance would average about 2%. Even more mind-blowing was the fact that the Emperor of Japan and the Queen of Spain, who had been in town at the time, had taken the test. Akihito had come out with a Q, and Sophia had come out with nothing. People began to speculate if the royal lines worldwide had originated with wizarding families whose genetic traits were diluted as they married Muggles over the centuries, and if so, were there wizarding royals no one knew about? Atlantis, the wizarding ambassador to the United Nations, had not provided any comment on this speculation. Normally, Atlantis was quite forthcoming on information about the wizarding world. The fact that he wasn't saying much here was raising a few eyebrows. The idea of royal lines starting out as wizarding families made a lot of sense. Traditionally, royals tended to marry each other, possibly to keep the Q and Z together. Furthermore, in a world before the statute of secrecy, or where the statute of secrecy was less stringently enforced, warrior wizards, the fighter magic users from Dungeons and Dragons, could very easily become great conquerors through the use of magic. It would also explain the legends of the divine right of kings, where kings were seen as gods. A preliminary investigation of the attack on the Bulgarian Ministry of Magic had pointed the finger squarely at a Celestine Crusader cell. The Christian splinter group had not liked wizards to begin with, and the shout of Deus Lo Volt before the bomb had gone off had been a dead giveaway. Celestine, clearly distraught, had condemned the attack as a defamation of God's name. Samuel excommunicated all members of that cell, and the Cone Gadol had reportedly been about ready to place a fatwa of execution against the Crusader High Command before someone talked him out of it, citing Muslim-Christian relations. Only time would tell if this would actually work. Xenophilius Lovegood, a British wizard who had already defended worshippers at a church, had immediately offered to assist in the investigation. Oddly enough, no word had come back from Urban Roman 9 yet, the current head of the Celestine Church. Supposedly, he was in deep discussions with some of his advisors and was trying to think of a viable solution. Many people were starting to become concerned that he was just going to turn a blind eye to the deaths of the wizards. I feared that was the case as well, and had a bad feeling that once again that instructions intended to provide guidance and moral support were being perverted into evil. Strange things were afoot in the Eastern Pacific as well. There were unconfirmed rumors that an entirely new continent filled with centaurs, yes, horse-man hybrids, had spontaneously appeared out of nowhere, triggering worldwide weather changes over the past few days. What's more, several islands in the Eastern Pacific, which had been part of French Polynesia, suddenly found themselves becoming part of this landmass. The French government was denying everything, of course. However, a friend of the family had been informed us that her vacation to Tahiti had been cancelled because of a fire in the resort complex. People were telling stories about fights between humans, armed with rifles, and centaurs. The centaurs were coming out second best, supposedly, as the humans' bodies were smaller than those of the centaurs, and the humans could just fire their rifles from behind trees in a prolonged guerrilla war. People were condemning the fight on both sides, of course. Why must a first contact situation with a brand new, clearly intelligent civilization, let alone species, be hostile? Harold Green's Philosopher's Stone and its valuable elixir of life were still off the market, and the latest reports from both Harold Green and Clinton said that the wonder drug was likely several years away from widespread distribution. However, due to the fact that many people were starting to get impatient for a cure now that they had witnessed the elixir in action, Clinton had promised $20 million for the first person to perfect a cure for cancer. The bounty would drop by $1 million every year for the next 8 years. Clinton also mentioned that secrecy sensors would be added to all federal courtrooms. These would detect if someone was lying, and people could choose to have their trials use either the traditional oaths on the Bible or the secrecy censors. The world was still agog about the fact that Nicholas Flamel, the British Minister of Magic, was indeed 600 years old. Having sworn the Aes Sedai oaths, there was no way he could deny it. Flamel was not giving interviews at the present time, as he was quite busy tracking down a supposedly missing philosopher's stone. He reiterated that although a cure for cancer would be wonderful, mankind was not intended to have eternal life. Flamel admitted, under the Aes Sedai oaths, that he had destroyed his own stone after a long discussion with Albus Dumbledore. The minister had ended his remarks with 3 sentences. I was always taught that wisdom comes with age, and I have learned many things over my 6 centuries plus of existence. There is a reason, ladies and gentlemen, that God limited us to 120 years of life. Live with it. I looked out the window. What was the world coming to? Things were getting very, very complicated. There was a whole new world out there of magic and sorcery, and I had only scratched the surface of it with my visit to the Dutch wizarding headquarters on Curacao. Would this new discovery enhance the human race or destroy it? Ministry of Magic Tarko Japan. The Japanese Ministry of Magic was hectic like a kicked ant nest these days. Some weeks ago, they decided to open the facility for guided Muggle tour and started joint research projects with several government agencies. Most of their numbers have taken the oaths by now. In fact, they already started to regret it. Surpassing the information about newly and unwillingly exposed Houyhnhnmland proved to be unexpectedly difficult with their hands tied by oaths and their Oblivators fired months ago. Then came the news of a Muggle terrorist attack 2 days ago in Bulgaria, forcing the Japanese wizards to rethink the whole. We're no longer hiding from Muggles, yay, policy. Currently, the ministry was closed for civilians once again, but they maintained their increased cooperation with the government and various science institutes, studying, for example, the effect of magic fields on electricity. Masakazu Nagata, Minister of Magic, was just thinking what else could happen unexpectedly when his phone rang. It was the receptionist. "Sorry to disturb you, sir, but we have guests and they want to speak with you." He sighed and responded, "I told you to redirect everyone to the specialist they'll work with anyway." "Please tell me it's at least wizards this time." The receptionist chuckled. "Well, yes and no. They aren't Muggles, but not wizards either. It's a delegation of merpeople led by Ambassador Temch from Rattle." Thinking it over, the minister finally answered, "Rattle. It's about time they open another trading outpost here. I was beginning to think they want to give a monopoly to the Americans. Let them in." The ministry was hidden under a middle-age fortification, and its corridors and rooms were built in the lavishly over-engineered style of an age when people didn't need to be crammed in the smallest possible spaces. Of course, unlike in Muggle architecture, this had practical applications. Giant visitors, however rare, meant that building things strong and large was a necessity. Thanks to this, the merpeople delegation could stay in their dried suits inside the building, which made things considerably easier for them. One of them carried another mermaid on its back, the chieftainess of a local tribe, who didn't have the opportunity to get a walker or the experience to drive it. The minister was wondering what the merpeople will do about the language barrier. He heard that the Kodiak trading post had Muggle computers they could use to write, but they had none of those available at the moment, and none of them could speak Mermish. Then he noticed that each siren had a slate and chalk in hand. "Greetings, Minister. My name is Temch. I'll be Rattle's delegated ambassador to your nation," wrote the female wearing the most shinily decorated encounter suit. "Allow me to introduce my colleagues, Sekola and Jisoo of Rattle here." Each of them pointed at the name tags painted on their walkers. "And our first client, the chieftainess of the Five Fins tribe. If possible, we'd like to switch this conversation to English or Gulliver. For her sake, she can't write or understand Japanese." Fortunately, Masakazu was fluent in English and had some knowledge of Gulliver, though the latter was seldom used. "Well, it has to suffice," he thought, then addressed the sirens in English. "I welcome you here and hope that this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Out of curiosity, where do you plan to open your embassy?" "Somewhere away from big cities," came the response. "The amount of human waste and garbage in the water is uncomfortable for us here, though the chieftainess here says it was much worse a few decades ago. There are several well-preserved coasts in your islands, but we don't know much about inland infrastructure. We'll need your help choosing the ideal location, where the water and the air is clean but access is easy. But first, the chieftainess has urgent news for you." Taking a look at the great map decorating the wall of the minister's office, the tribal leader pointed at the area known to the humans as Teiji, Wakayama. "My tribe's town is near this place. The humans living there kill dolphins every year, and our patience was wearing thin for them." Some of the more reckless ones have been leaving my tribe and joined another tribe that used to be weak and nomadic, but has recently grew strong in number and equipment. We've been skirmishing with them, but they left the humans alone, seeing the need to keep ourselves hidden. But 2 days ago, they trespassed again, and our scouts have found the Muggle ships smashed to pieces and sunk. Please, Minister, they are now the enemy of both of us. Help us. The wizard was speechless. He knew of the Teji incident, of course, even had a debate with the Prime Minister over it, but he attributed it to a storm, albeit one probably caused by the failure of the Houyhnhnmland protector. The Muggles have been searching for bodies ever since, but it was a task their technology was better suited for than magic. At least it was obvious that it wasn't the poor woman's tribe. The damage done to the boats clearly exceeded the capacities of these primitives. Which begged a question. Incredible powers must have been unleashed in that incident. Tell me more about that tribe. Why do you suspect them? The songs of our keepers say the Broken Shell tribe has always been trying to take our feeding grounds. The minister interrupted. Wait. What's a keeper, and what kind of feeding ground? Ambassador Temsh answered that one in Japanese. The keepers are the wise men and women of a tribe who dedicate their lives to preserve the oral and written history of their people. They are influential advisors. The lead keeper is second only to the chieftain itself. And by feeding ground, she means kelp forests and roots of migrating sea life. Fine then, continue. I'll keep my other questions for the end, Chieftainess, said the minister. You may call me Asmera. It will save you trouble when you deal with other tribal leaders. It used to be my name, but I discarded it when I became leader. But it beats, hey you, over there. Anyway, back on the attackers. They have no permanent settlement we know of. Since ancient times, they always came, but we drove them back. It was a fight for well-being, and we had all the advantages. Higher numbers, stable nutrition, more refined tools, and a defensible city. But something happened 12 years ago. Rumors began to spread that a demon wearing the body of a merman arrived to them and took over. Since then, they never seem to lack food. Their knives and spears are sharper than ours, and they steadily gain numbers as people betray their tribes all over the coast and flock under his banner. They number in the thousands by now. At least they didn't attack us. Since then it looks like they already have everything they could gain by taking our city. The minister was deep in thought. A demon sounds more like a wizard to me. Is such a thing possible? The chieftainess and the ambassador began writing at the same time, and their slates read as, "Never happened in any tribe I know of, and there are some urban legends in Rock-to-Rattle claiming that merwizards exist, but I don't know any. I wouldn't put it past some houses to raise one in secrecy if such a person is ever born, but it's dangerous." Sarcasm was dripping in the wizard's voice. "Marvelous. We may have a merwizard behind this. Anyway, you mentioned trespassing. When and how did that happen?" Asmera wrote. I was going to elaborate on that. Yesterday, a fishing party of our tribe heard the marching songs of the Broken Shell tribe. They didn't see them and were even out of Doplin's sense range, but still clearly audible. It means there were many of them. They were moving south, towards the deep ocean. We are eager to help you catch them, as long as we can trust your people to let us live in peace afterwards. Masakazu Nagata recognized an urgent situation when he saw one. They must have captured the whalers, who may still be alive. We must rescue them. I understand your tribe's dislike for them, but they are the citizens of my nation, and I will not stand aside when they are kidnapped. We will need all available help, including the help of your people for that operation. Your tribe's independence has always been respected by our ministry, and our laws will ensure that it will stay so. For now, I can only give my word as Minister of Magic, but I'll speak with the Prime Minister to see what protection we can offer to your tribe. Does Rock-to-Rattle has anything to add? Yes, wrote Ambassador Temsh. We also offer a small team of experts for the search as a gesture of goodwill. Most of the search will, however, be done by the Five Fins tribe, as we don't have the manpower for that on our own. You see, even as we speak, every coastal nation's government in the world is receiving a similar delegation, and that puts a strain on our resources. Chapter 305. Hagrid visits Atlantis. Thursday, August 1, 1996, High Chief's Officer Atlantis Rubeus Hagrid was amazed at what he was seeing. He had grown up thinking that he was the only half-giant in existence. Things had changed a little when he had met a limp Maxime at the Triwizard Tournament, but two members did not a species make. The land of Atlantis was filled with half-giants and short exiles from Brobdingnag. For the first time in his life, he didn't stand out by being either too tall or too short. The High Chief had been a most gracious host. He had introduced Hagrid to many of the Iody elite, including several cabinet members. Every single person he had spoken to agreed that Hagrid would make a very good ambassador. It would take a while, however, for Hagrid to get accustomed to this nation if he took the job. The land of Atlantis was at an extremely high latitude, and living that far north had some rather interesting ramifications. For one thing, the sun didn't look like it was going to be setting any time soon. Sure, it got lower and lower in the northern sky. However, just before it hit the horizon, it slowed to a halt and then began climbing again. How was someone going to be able to sleep through all this? Were these chaps supposed to sleep 24 hours a day in February and store up all that rest for the summer? The combination of the 24-hour sunlight with the cold temperatures didn't make much sense either. Here it was, in the middle of August, and he was wearing a coat. It slowly dawned on him why furs and robes were such an important part of life up here. At the moment, the High Chief was pointing out interesting sights in the capital. The little village of Shwatch didn't look much like a national capital, and the High Chief had to explain that the state of Atlantis did not have a permanent capital. Rather, it was wherever the High Chief lived. This man, for some reason, only men were eligible, was determined by a carefully monitored election where all of the towns submitted candidates. If no one managed to secure a majority, the men who had received fewer than the median number of votes were eliminated, and the towns held another election with half the candidates. Atlantis had friendly relations with the Inuits and other native peoples from the Canadian Northwest. In a stunning reversal of traditional giant politics where size determined the Gurg, ambassadors to the Muggle communities could not be spellcasters and had to be no taller than 7 feet. Ambassadors to the Inuit wizarding communities could, of course, be of any height or magical ability. However, they could only interact with the wizarding world. The High Chief pointed out the newly constructed building which was serving as the Iody Council Chamber. They're still debating revealing themselves to the Muggles in there, Mr. Hagrid. There was widespread support for the motion up to a few days ago, when those idiots in the Howienham lands knocked out the Protector and showed what could happen when a country revealed itself. Thank God that revolution started in the summer. Had it been winter, we'd have been knee-deep in snow by now. We've already got enough problems with global warming up here. We don't need more climatic issues. Hagrid frowned. But you're not going to be exposing any new land, sir. You're just going to be telling the world that you have a little community up here with a few spellcasters. They already know about half-giants thanks to me, so you don't need to worry about that. The High Chief shook his head. There are also political ramifications as well, Mr. Hagrid. Keep in mind that the entire population of the Northwest Territories is maybe double the size of Atlantis. Furthermore, we have wizards and are 11 feet tall, in some cases taller. I don't know about you, but if I were Ottawa, I would be very nervous that we try to take over some of that Muggle territory up there to reduce our population density. Hagrid whistled. I see, sir. That could be problematic. What have the Inuits told the Canadian government? Very little that the Muggles don't already know, Mr. Hagrid. Very few of us have the privilege or are short enough to interact with the Muggles. Hagrid thought for a minute. Your society seems much better organized and cohesive than that of the Inuits. Could you help the Inuits in the same way the Xyland are with their trading post? Wizarding support could be very valuable up here. The High Chief pursed his lips. That's part of our plan, Mr. Hagrid. What everything is going to boil down to us is this. Will the Canadians be more appreciative of our help, or will they be scared of us and try to eliminate us? If they kick us out of here, we'll have nowhere to go. We're too tall to live with the Muggles and too short to go back to Brobdingnag. Ancestral wizarding Shrinesial South Korea. Mr. Wang. Wang grunted in astonishment. Here was a voice he didn't recognize. All he could tell at this point was that the man had a very bad accent. He turned to face the speaker and was surprised to find that the man wasn't Korean. He appeared to be one of the British personnel who had arrived in Seoul during the fight with Voldemort. Wondering what was going on, Wang bowed. Yes. The man shook his hand. Good evening. I'm Wizard Horace Slughorn, and I was wondering if you could assist us with something. Wang bit his lip. He knew how to cast a few simple spells now thanks to the work of the Wizarding Shrine, but he still didn't like doing it much because he was afraid he'd blow something up and not realize it. If it is in my power, I will. However, I must warn you that, until recently I had no idea that I could cast spells. Slughorn nodded in understanding. I'm aware of that, Mr. Wang. In fact, that is precisely why I was hoping you would be able to assist us. You see, we've found another Muggle who is capable of casting spells. He, too, has the Q gene and not the Z gene. Would you or your instructors be willing to help him? Wang bowed. It would be my pleasure, Mr. Slughorn. Who is it? Slughorn chuckled. You're not going to believe it, but William V., the King of England. Wang's jaw dropped. What? The King of England is a wizard. Apparently, Mr. Wang. Believe me, we're as surprised as you are. Wang covered his eyes with his hand. I don't want to blow up the King of England with a misfiring spell, Mr. Slughorn. You won't, Mr. Wang. Your instructors will likely be there with you, and Hogwarts personnel will be there as well. But I don't even speak English. Slughorn chuckled. We'll take care of that. We've got interpreters. Wang whistled. I'll think about it. Proceedings of Ghost Introductory Conference held February 18, 1996. 1. Introduction. Page 12. Interview with Rebecca Nurse. Page 63. Interview with Imam Abd ibn Tariq. Page 124. Interview with Samuel Ben Eli. Page 175. Interview with Sir Robert Lane. Page 386. Interview with Tribal Shaman Tapek. Page 467. Interview with Little Cloud. Page 508. Interview with Kartik. Page 589. Discussion of Sheol. Page 6310. Discussion of Limbo. Page 7811. Discussion of Future Studies. Page 9012. Bibliography. Page 99. Proof of Dolphin Sentience Interview with Bottlenose Dolphin. Grassy Key, Florida today. Dolphin Research Center released a press statement that promises nothing less than absolute proof that dolphins are fully sentient beings, just like us humans. This could not have happened without the help of the merpeople, who shared the oceans with the dolphins for thousands of years, and forget a very special connection with them. Now, we present you the transcript of 2 interviews, first with the bottlenose dolphins from DRC, and the other with Zeke, the ambassador from the merpeople nation of Roctorattle. For the first interview, we gave Ambassador Zeke a list of questions we wanted to ask from the dolphins. He then proceeded to shapeshift into a dolphin himself to communicate with them, ask them the questions, and memorize the answers. Now, let's see how the interview went. The ambassador got in the water and transformed a letter. Hey guys, look, a new dolphin. Kibby, he's not a real one. Let me handle this. Swim so close to Zeke, they almost touch. Greetings, Blinker. Zeke, heh, never heard that before. Greetings to you and your pod. Kay, what brings you here? Z, I came to see your pod. The humans want me to ask you some questions. K, so they finally noticed we're not stupid fish. Took them long enough. Ask, and I will answer. Z, thank you. Is that true that you're the only member of this pod who have ever been outside of this place? K, yes. Only I was born in the sea. The others were here all their lives. Well, some of them were brought from other such places, but never the sea. Z, are you happy here? K, not really. It's difficult to live in such a confined, small place, and I long for the infinite waters of the sea. But it's not that bad. I get food without hunting. I have a pod to play with, females to mate with, and the humans see to it that we don't get bored. They can play in ways I would not think of on my own. Z, would you prefer living free in the sea? K, any time. Z, do they treat you well? K, they saved my life. They found me in the sea, injured and sick. I would have died if not for their help. For this, I owe them. Z, would you leave if you could? K, as I said, I indebted to the humans, but if they said I paid my debt, I'd be happy to return to the sea. Allow me one question, Blinker. Did they tell why they keep us here? Z, yes. They wish to learn more about your kind. The playing with human stuff is just for money, so they can keep learning about you. K, money. The word doesn't exist in dolphin language. The mere concept is alien to them. Zeke used a merpeople expression here, Z. It's part of human group life, something they give in exchange for food and other good things. It's complicated. K, I've realized that. I've once seen one big place of your kind. They overcomplicate life too, but that's still nothing compared to humans. Z, but you know they are smart just like you. K, yes, but they are hard to understand. They make their places and wear their clothes and even keep us here, but they are still so often sad. Z, right. Now let's speak of pods. Do you know of any greater groups of dolphins? K, usually we live in small groups where everyone knows each other and we stay in one territory, except when we're traveling. Sometimes the pods gather into a greater group with hundreds of dolphins when the time is right. Z, when the time is right. K, when we find enough food to share. Then we welcome other groups to our territory, and we feed together, play together, exchange stories and mate. Also, sometimes a pod leaves that didn't enter. Members of several groups band together to try their luck apart from the old group. Z, why do they do that? K, they want to get away from dominant members of their own pod. Maybe they want to choose mates, maybe they disagree with the dominant ones or are banished. Z, disagree. As in, you guys are debating things. K, of course. Why not? You can't have all members of a species agree in everything. When one thinks differently of an important thing, she might leave the pod and find another one that agrees with here. Like to like, as I like to say. Z, do all of you live in pods? K, no. Most males live alone or in pairs or groups of 3. They wander around and join pods of females and young for a short time, mate, and go on. Z, what about other kinds of dolphins? K, that's one of the things the debates are about. Some groups cheerfully mixes with them and even breeds with them. Others think they are inferior and should be killed or driven off, or else. There are many different opinions regarding that, and many interesting stories. I've even heard of a male in the southern seas who mated with an orca. That was a brave guy. Z, about that, the humans say some dolphins even tried to mate with humans. Do you think it's truly what happened? K, probably. Lonely males will try anything if they don't find females, including each other, and humans are pleasing to touch, almost like us. Just a lot more bony and fragile, and they can't hold their air. But you know what a male dolphin feels, don't you? I've seen many blinkers play with each other in this form, sometimes even with us. Mind you, I'd rather take that orca than one of your kind lives in enormous groups and has hands with deadly things in it. They come playing, and we are happy to do so, but only fools initiate mating with them. Z, leave my people out of this. K, why? Mating feels good, you shouldn't be ashamed about it. Z, not the way your kind does it, no. I can't imagine any merpeople wishing to participate in that brutal, savage activity you call mating. K, and yet still there are tales of some who did it. It seems your kind has just as diverse opinions as mine. Z. Okay, you win. Now it's very disturbing. Please let's speak of something else. K. Okay, allow me a question. The humans throwing nets in the water and killing us in many ways are bad for you too. Will you ever do something about it? Z. Yes. Now that we no longer need to hide, we will talk to the humans and convince them to stop killing dolphins. I'm confident that the story of the two of us talking will be enough to do it. They did not know you were sentient. K. Believe me, I can understand that. We can't speak to them, and we don't create places or use tools. They are so blind, they couldn't find out any other way. Z. What about other kinds of sea life? Other dolphins, whales, seals, that kind of thing. Do you know of anyone as smart as you? K. I told you we disagree about these things, so I can only speak for myself. I think other dolphins and porpoises are more or less just like us. Whales are strange, but they sing to each other in beautiful voices, so they may or may not be smart. I've met no seals in the sea, but there are some in this place, and they appear to be very vocal, but I don't understand them and can't exactly go over to see them for myself up close. Others. I've met big, slow, fat creatures a few times. They appeared to be dumb. The rest is just fish. But of course appearances may be deceiving, and the smartness of anything I can't talk to can only be guessed. Z. Thank you for your answers. This will be for now. We shall meet again, but for now I say goodbye. K. It's been a good thing to speak you. Please tell the humans thanks for all the fish. After Zeke got out of the water and wrote his answers down, we interviewed him too. Here's the transcript, reporter. These are pretty surprisingly eloquent answers from a dolphin. Did really he say this, word to word? Zeke, translating from dollfish is difficult. They have many expressions for things that are fairly irrelevant for us, and no good expressions for things we find important. And their grammar is different from human too, though that's hard for me. It is very similar to Mermish. Ah, what do you exactly mean by Mermish? I've heard you sound very differently underwater and above water. Are those two different languages? Z. Correct. Underwater Mermish is a beautiful language with all the sounds a human can produce, and then some. It's good for nice songs. Surface Mermish, on the other hand, is awful, and painful both to hear and to speak. It's only good for quick conversation, and has a limited vocabulary with few synonyms, and as short words as possible. But it's the only language we can speak on the surface. Underwater, we can speak any language you can speak, and we often do, because though Mermish is a nice language, it's not a practical language. Ah, not practical. How? Z, to put it in the simplest possible terms, if you want to say something long, beautiful, and full of emotions, you use Mermish, and if you want to say something quickly and squarely, you use Gulliver or a Muggle language. Ah, tell me about this Gulliver. It sounds almost familiar. Is there a chance of seeing this word somewhere before? Z. It is a corrupted dialect of medieval English, one of the common languages of many wizards, with Latin being the other. I doubt you've ever heard about it. Until recently, such knowledge was inevitably obliviated. Ah, back to the topic of dolphins. Tell me more about this magical transformation of yours. Z. Ask your questions, and I'll answer to the best of my knowledge. Ah, I see you transformed into a bottlenose dolphin. Is this true for all of your kind? Z. Yes, all merpeople, be it siren, selkie, or mero, transform into bottlenose dolphins. Ah, does that mean you can breed with dolphins? Z. Absolutely not. Our dolphin forms are magical transformations and sterile by nature. Ah, interesting. What does that mean for pregnant mermaids? Z. The fetus doesn't transform when the mother does. Size and anatomy is too different, so after a time, it would cause miscarriage. Generally, transformation is considered unsafe for the whole duration of the pregnancy, but in the first few months, it's relatively free of risk. Once it starts to show, it's considered the end of safe dolphin form fun until childbirth. Also, women feel when they can no longer safely transform. In fact, the more faint variant of that feeling is the first thing they notice if they become pregnant. Ah, you've mentioned different kinds of merpeople. Please elaborate on them. Z. We are like humans, with great diversity in color and shape. I, for example, am a siren. Merows have bluish-green skin and usually green hair, and selkies have greenish-gray skin with usually brown hair. There is no other difference between them other than appearance, and all are of the same species. Half-breeds are entirely possible and fairly common in Rattle. Ah, Kibby repeatedly called you a blinker. What does that mean? Z. It refers to one of the ways we use our dolphin forms. Dolphins have special organs that make clicking sounds that then travel through water, reflect from objects, and the dolphin senses the reflected sounds with another organ, allowing it to get a good picture of its surroundings even in darkness or murky water. They just emit the clicks in a static, even pace and see what comes back. Us, we use these organs for communication. We change the pace of the clicks, generating messages. I've read about human Morse code. It's very similar. Now imagine you use your eye to see. You blink when you need to, and you see there is one guy who makes Morse code with his blinks. What you're going to nickname him? Ah, interesting. You said that's one use of the dolphin form. What are the others? Z. Speed, strength, a form that allows us to observe Muggles up close, and a more effective metabolism. Our true form is very skinny, which means we have to eat a lot to maintain core temperature. When food is scarce, we spend as much time in dolphin form as possible. Ah, I see. So, do the dolphins know whether or not a fellow dolphin is a merperson? Z. Not necessarily, but it would take a very experienced person to keep it secret. Dolphins are quite observant. But they accept merpeople among themselves, and there are a few of us who are so fed up with any kind of society that they go to live among the dolphins, saying that they are happy because they don't make things needlessly complicated. Ah, you don't think they are right, do you? Z, I agree that dolphins are happy, more so than us. But to live like them is to give up shaping the world altogether. Humans didn't realize dolphins are sentient because they didn't create anything, and truth be told, we probably wouldn't have realized it either without our transformation ability. Chapter 306, Picketing the Aquarium. Thursday, August 1, 1996, New England Aquarium, Boston. Massachusetts, United States of America. The aquarium had already closed up shop for the evening. The last tourists had left the building, and the animals in the touch tanks had been brought back into their containers for the night. The staff was doing what it could to clean everything up. However, there was one mess which was going to take a lot more than a few marine biologists to clean up. A few hours earlier, there had been a report that Zeke, the ambassador to the merpeople, had communicated with a dolphin and proven that once and for all that the graceful marine mammals were not only intelligent but a sentient species. Dolphins had at least one spoken language, albeit not a written one. Whether all dolphins all over the planet spoke the same language was still an open question. If there were multiple delphinic languages, that brought up the possibility of honest-to-goodness dolphin nations hiding in the ocean, along with the merpeople. The scientists had been floored by the discovery and had immediately started developing plans to speak with dolphins in the aquariums and observe the way pods interacted with each other. The Woods Hole Institute suddenly found itself flooded with inquiries, most of which they weren't able to resolve. Unfortunately for the aquarium staff, one other group had had a strong reaction to the news. PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. Within half an hour of the announcement, even before the report was confirmed, there were no fewer than 15 people picketing outside the exhibit housing the dolphin show. The protesters were carrying signs which read, "Free the dolphins," "Get out of jail fish," "Cruelty to animals," and so forth. One clever sign argued that the poor creatures were the most intelligent dolphins in Miami, including the NFL players who had survived the nuclear explosion. Although the vast majority of people didn't really know what to make of the new development, it was obvious that some people had been riled up. Channels 4, 5, and 7 were all covering the protests, interrupting the broadcasts about the economic crises, the reconstruction of New York and Cambridge, and the Philosopher's Stone controversy. The New England Aquarium was not the only site being targeted. The Monterey Aquarium, Whaling Museum, and 3 other sites were also affected. Rumor had it that Greenpeace was thinking of getting involved as well. The fact that dolphins were sentient had surprised most of the wizards as well. Nicholas Flamel, still screaming about the stone, had not been available for comment. Travis Radner had grudgingly admitted that this forced the American Department of Magic to reconsider the way it handled dolphins. Hermione Granger, the latest British teenage superstar, had immediately sided with the dolphins, explaining that she had already denounced the wizards' maltreatment of elves and created a protest group known as SPEW, the Society for Preservation of Elvish Welfare. With one stroke of a pen, that E had turned into an I, intelligent. The newly renamed SPEW immediately took the dolphins under its wing and started petitioning the British government to confirm Zeke's observations, and if they were confirmed, give dolphins and all other sentient species the same rights human beings had. Within an hour of the young witch's declaration, SPEW had suddenly ballooned to over 250 members and had earned itself 2 new chapters in the United States and Canada. So far, SPEW was just a fringe group. Only time would tell if it would become a serious force in American politics. Friday, August 2, 1996, Interim Government Office Ancestral Wizarding Shrine Seoul. The president of South Korea answered the phone. Yes. The voice on the other end of the line sounded excited. Mr. President, I think we can declare victory. With 56% of the vote counted up there, we've got 73% in favor of democracy, 5% in favor of the status quo, and 22% in favor of some other form of government. The first step to reunification appears to have been taken, sir. Any irregularities? A few. However, the margin of victory is so high that I don't think they'll change the outcome. The president punched his fist in the air in excitement. That's very good to hear, my friend. Who's the new president? Man Jung Man, sir. He was a former underground democracy activist who got involved with the unruling committee and made a name for himself. Fantastic. Now it's time for the next step. I'll make the announcement in a couple of hours. You mean the announcement of the referendum on reunification, with Seoul as the combined capital? That is affirmative. The current plan has them voting on independence, operating under protectorate status, or rejoining South Korea. If they decide to become our protectorate, the transition will take place on New Year's Day 1998. If they choose unification, they will become part of our nation on New Year's Day 1999. Drackle and the rest of those people will clear out of the DMZ 6 months before the transition. Makes sense. So do you see any reason to change it? Not that I know of. I'll keep you posted if anything comes up. Thank you, sir. Oh, and one more thing. You're not going to believe this. The president chuckled. Given all the strange events of late, I'll probably believe anything now. What is it? There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by, have you actually read the Robert Jordan books, Mr. President? The fantasy series which introduced the concept of an Aes Sedai. I hadn't, but I've heard of it. That's it, sir. Well, it looks like Man Jung Man has decided to adopt one of the customs Jordan's nations did in the novels. He's going to appoint an Aes Sedai advisor. Thursday, August 1, 1996, Omega Institute. Urban Roman 9 winced. Samuel looked as if he was going to punch him in the head. Fortunately, since Samuel was a ghost, the biblical legend wasn't going to do any physical damage, at least. The interpreter stared at him and shrugged. He's not happy, Urban. You're not going to. Samuel talked right over her, and she started translating. Urban, what is this that I hear happening in this country in Eastern Europe, near what you call Turkey? Urban tried to stay calm. There was an attack on a ministry of magic there. Several people were killed, as I've been told. Samuel grunted. You've probably been told a lot of this. Suleiman, John Paul, and the interpreter have all told me that the Celestines were behind it. Urban's mind raced. It sounded like a Celestine Crusader cell, all right. However, Urban hadn't actually ordered the attack. He may have organized the first Crusader cells to resist the wizards, but once the cells were organized, he couldn't control what their members did. He tried to think of an excuse. The fact that they were Celestines does not mean all of the people in my sect are evil, Samuel. Indeed, Urban, I cannot. After all, I know that Celestine himself is good and that he has seen the light and accepted my assistance. However, the fact that the distrust of wizards seems to be pervasive has forced me to take some regrettable but necessary actions. This doesn't sound good, Urban thought. Could Samuel have figured out that Urban had been egging on many of the cells? Samuel braced himself, and the interpreter drew a deep breath. I believe I may have no choice but to excommunicate you and all major religious leaders in your sect. Due to the fact that we are going to have a unified front when it comes to the conference starting later today, you have been given a 5-month probation period. If the members of your sect do not improve their behavior, you will all be excommunicated at the end of the year. Both Suleiman and John Paul have agreed to this. Urban's jaw dropped. You can't excommunicate Celestine if he's reformed. Samuel nodded. Indeed, I cannot. However, Celestine has agreed to side with John Paul on this. Remember that he founded his movement because of the iconoclasm and his distrust of me personally, and he has discovered that those fears have been groundless. As a result, Celestine is now on the same side as John Paul, and as a result, I no longer consider him part of the sect which, in great irony, now bears his name. Had he known then what he does now, there would have been no Celestine sect. Someone other than Celestine has corrupted this man's sect, and we both know who that is. Samuel went on. You will also notice that I am not excommunicating the laymen in the Celestine churches. They have been taught improper doctrines by bigoted clergy, and it is my opinion that replacing the teachers can save the students. Urban tried to think of a suitable rebuttal. Samuel, now wait a minute. Samuel talked right over him. You have 5 months, Urban. Now, if you know what is good for you, you will do exactly what I tell you. Hidden cave system at the edge of the continental shelf somewhere south of Japan-Pacific Ocean. It has been 2 days since their capture, and Naburo Kuroki began to see a pattern in the placement of their guards. He didn't have anything to measure time with, but he guessed they had 3 short shifts, a few hours each, repeating without variation. The 98 of them were placed in one branch of the cave, watched by a mere dozen of the creatures. Not that it wasn't more than enough. They were tied securely, and he suspected that the strange weed they fed them every few hours was the only reason they could breathe water, and also speak, as he realized after several hours of trying. Escape seemed hopeless. So it was time for more indirect approaches. He recognized one of the guards from before it. No, she was the one who gave them food when that ridiculously large tuna fish was shredded horribly by the fishmen. Right now, she seemed bored out of her mind, so, remembering that he heard them speak in a language so similar to English that he could either know an expression or guess it from context, Kuroki initiated a whispered little conversation. Hey, you there with the necklace, do you speak English? The female looked at him and swam closer. I do not know what English is, but why do you want to know? Kuroki looked at her, puzzled. What language is this? She cast him an amused glance. Why, of course, Gulliver. You seem to be in need of it, yet you mastered it. How can this be? It is very similar to a Gaijin language I know. Most of the world speaks it. What is a Gaijin? I see. Most of the 2 languages are the same, yet there are differences. Perhaps the differences are enough that we understand each other. It's not like I was forbidden from speaking with you to pass my time. So tell me, human, what's your name? Naburo Kuroki. And yours? Gennet, daughter of Tiblet, of the Broken Shell tribe of the Merpeople. Why did you murder dolphins? Oh, that's why you guys kidnapped us. Well, we kill dolphins for the same reason we kill fish, for food. Why is that a problem? From the grimace on Gennet's face, he immediately knew he shouldn't have said it so cockily. She shrieked, Pashara. You are not just ignorant, but a cannibalistic Garazj as well. We should have killed you all. He was desperate now. We didn't kill anyone. This must be a misunderstanding. If looks could kill, he'd have been dead 10 times over by now. She seemed to have regained her calm, but she was visibly near to another explosion of fury. You and your people have killed sons and daughters of my tribe, and dolphins too. They had to keep their Tal form hidden from you, so they stayed dolphins even as their blood was let into the sea. They trusted your people to be decent enough to agree that food that talks is not food, and they gave their life for this. He was shocked. He had slain people unknowingly. He had blood on his hands, but some pieces just didn't add up. After a minute of silence, he finally said, I'm truly sorry. I didn't know they were people. If they had shown themselves for what they are, we would have apologized and let them go. A short, bitter laugh escaped her mouth. You really don't see, human. Dolphins are people just like you or me. They feel, they think, even talk. But you'll see for yourself soon enough when. She was interrupted by another mermaid rushing in at top speed, slowing to a halt before slamming into them, screaming all along. Come, hurry. Your sister, it's her time. Hurry, Gennet looked at her, then quickly said, Sorry, I must go now. My sister is about to give birth. To the young whaler, then she was off. Observatory Vault, Trapananda, South Pacific Ocean, west of the southern tip of South America. In the middle of a cavernous chamber, faintly illuminated by the blue glow of runes carved on all walls, floor and ceiling, a huge transparent globe hovered. Its surface was that of the planet Earth, complete with the hidden landmasses in the Pacific and the Atlantic. The continental landmasses reflected a state before the present. Obviously, the globe's creators didn't yet update most of the highly visible landmarks of the last decades. Forests were bigger, deserts, and urban areas smaller than what a satellite would show. Coastal areas and the seafloor, on the other hand, were very detailed and up-to-date, with symbols appearing at every location if the viewer concentrated on a given point. And there were glowing darts on the map, in various colors, radiating with a light that was visible only to wizards. Just like the landmarks, each dart showed a cluster of symbols when focused at. The distribution was odd. Most of them were silver, scattered near the landmasses, and a few in the open ocean. There were golden ones, mostly concentrated into a solid blob of gold west of Patagonia, with a few scattered ones blinking into existence and disappearing all around the globe, even on the landmasses. And there were about a dozen red dots, centered in the relatively shallow waters east of the Seychelles Islands. Their very color was unnerving, but they were there for so long without significant change. No watchers cared about them. They were a nuisance, but each of them popped into existence, spent some time in and near that place, and after a few short decades, blinked out. However, there was another, smaller group of red darts in the North Pacific. These weren't there for much more than a decade, starting with a single one. Then another appeared next year, 2 others after that, 3 others after that. By now, there were 24 ominous red dots scattered over a large area, for most of the time staying where they appeared without further update, but recently they started to congregate around the first. Suddenly, a new silver dot appeared near the small red cluster, but it too turned red in a second. A small group of merpeople, wearing strange garments, such as several harnesses and belts with pouches hanging from those, looked at each other, exchanging worried glances. One of them finally spoke in unusually musical accented Gulliver. We can't allow this to continue any further. It's one thing we can't go into rock to rattle, but we have errant merwizards at our hand here, multiplying at an unnaturally fast rate. Another watcher angrily responded, But the rules are clear in this. We cannot reap when wizards are near the children. It's too risky for. Screw your rules, Jowan, interrupted the first speaker. They never did include this shit happening. If we don't act now, this will completely get out of our hands. Jowan was not that easy to convince, however. Even so, above all else, we have to maintain our cover. If the rules are outdated, it's up to the Archon to decide how to change them, not you. Then I shall take this before him immediately, responded the determined watcher, and stormed out of the chamber. Coast of Teijihigashimuro district, Wakyamajapan. Night has already began to fall when the divers, ships and submarines of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force were joined by hundreds of five-fin warriors. They were joined by a dozen or Rattle's finest specialists, including investigator and tracker Kima of Red Squad and creepy guy with the freaking magic eyes, Tony. No driders were sent out this time. The heavy constructs would have only slowed them down. This time, it was up to the merpeople to find the enemy, and they didn't have much hope that the subs with their few wizards inside will get anywhere near in time when that happened. The repeatedly reassigned detective was happy to see her former squadmate again, but the circumstances worried her, prompting her to make the rhetoric question. "Hey, big guy, how come we always end up in a damn mage hunt?" Her blindfolded companion didn't seem worried about it. With these cool human toys, he showed the underwater revolver borrowed from the JMSDF. They could send me after wizards any day. Boom, headshot. The girl didn't hold back her sarcastic remark. And here it is. Do we need further proof that Muggle culture has already spoiled your brain? Then she added, "Anyway, I hope these tribal guys won't get any of these. Having never even seen a crossbow, they would forget which end to point where when they pull the trigger." Chapter 307, Omega Conference opens. Thursday, August 1, 1996, Omega Institute Heimbeck, New York, United States of America. Dan rather could not recall having ever seen this many religious figures in one room at the same time. The only thing that could conceivably have even come close would have been a papal conclave, yet as a layman, even he wouldn't have been able to get into one of those. That exeunt omnes would have forced him out along with everyone else. A good third of the delegates were Christian dignitaries. He recognized Vatican notables such as the papal nuncio and Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. There were no fewer than 8 monks, 12 cardinals in addition to Ratzinger, and 5 people who looked like professors. The Patriarch of Constantinople was also there, as was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Rather imagined what would have happened if the same gathering had been attempted a few hundred years earlier. Holy war, if not worse. Except that the holy war would not have been between Christian and Christian. This was because another third of the delegates were Muslim, both Shia and Sunni. Several of the people appeared to be Sufi mystics, which intrigued him a great deal. He didn't know much about Islamic mysticism. Both men and women were represented, and although the men often frowned upon the female scholars, they wisely kept their mouths shut. Roughly 1 out of every 5 people was Jewish. Several rabbis were there, primarily conservative and reform. The Orthodox were still wary for the most part, but a couple of brave souls had still managed to make it over there. A few Kabbalistic scholars were there as well. Rather could not help but be amazed at how well the 3 faiths managed to get along. He knew all too well that peaceful relations between religious groups tended to get scant airtime on the news. He probably wasn't the only reporter who gave everyone the impression that every monotheist would be more than willing to attack every other monotheist at a drop of a hat, kippah, or burqa. How many people realized that the terrorists were the exception rather than the rule? Not all of the monotheists in the room were religious. It had taken Suleiman and John Paul some fast talking with Samuel to pull it off, but they had eventually agreed to include a small group of people who culturally belonged to a monotheistic faith, but were in fact non-practicing. It was important to have all viewpoints represented when it came to the monotheistic faiths. The remaining delegates were primarily Buddhist or Hindu. There was some friction between the adherents of these 2 traditions and the monotheists, but thankfully everything seemed to still be working out. Rather brought out his camera, walked over to the nearest delegate, and tapped him on the shoulder. "Excuse me, revered one, but can I ask you a few questions?" The man, who appeared to be Muslim, turned and nodded. "Go ahead." What's going through your mind right now? The man chuckled. Allah take me, my mind is still a bit blown at what we're trying to do here. Although I personally don't consider myself worthy enough to be part of this gathering, Allah must have his reasons for including me. Why do you think he chose you? The man shrugged. I don't presume to know the way Allah thinks. All I have to offer is experience as a dean of religious studies at a university in Morocco. Sounds like he realized that you have a great deal of experience in interfaith studies and a lot of people who can help you through this. Quite possibly. However, like I said, we mortals cannot comprehend the divine. Rather changed the subject. Do you think that you will be able to unify the monotheistic faiths and overcome millennia of animosity? The Muslim was silent for a moment. Eventually, he drew a deep breath. Inshallah, we will be up to the task. However, we are all but human. Even the wizards here have admitted that their ability to cast spells does not change the fact that they will inevitably make mistakes. Rather whistled silently to himself and jotted down some notes. There are wizards here as well. The man nodded. From what I've been told, yes. The fact that a person has some unusual abilities does not make him any less human. To the best of my knowledge, religious devotion and magical abilities are completely independent of each other. Very interesting. How long do you think it will take? The cleric looked around the room, where people were starting to head for their seats. Months, perhaps, possibly years. I honestly have no idea. Hopefully, I will live long enough to see this come to fruition. Rather thanked the interviewee and got his name. He then turned the camera on the platform in the front of the stage, where 7 chairs had been placed behind 2 lecterns. The audience buzzed as a man and a woman walked onto the stage, bowed to someone in a curtained-off area, and then took their positions beside the lecterns. Rather recognized them as the people who had been serving as the interpreters for Samuel and Deborah. The interpreters introduced themselves and then bid everyone who was able to rise. Chairs scraped across the floor as 6 of the most powerful religious figures in the world made their way on stage. The Pope and Dalai Lama seemed serene. Celestine seemed nervous, and he was supporting Suleiman, who still walked with a slight limp. The panel was closed out by a Hindu leader, a rabbi, and the Patriarch of Constantinople. Later on in the evening, Rather would learn that the seating order had been determined at random prior to the beginning of the conference. The people started muttering quietly among themselves. Rather was puzzled for a moment until he realized something surprising. Urban Roman 9, the Celestine anti-pope, was not there. Celestine himself was there, but he had renounced his claim to the papacy. What was going on here? Suleiman sat down. However, the 6 other men remained on their feet, staring expectantly at the 2 lecterns. John Paul stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Omega Institute and Retreat Center. It is my great pleasure to welcome our 2 featured guests, Samuel the son of Eli, and Andrea the wife of Lapidot, also known as Deborah. There was a flash of light at the front of the stage. When it had cleared, Samuel and Deborah were standing there, shimmering in their ghostly auras. Rather recognized Samuel immediately. He had never seen Deborah before, however, though he had heard rumors that she had come back and may have even been Samuel's teacher. There wasn't much to see, however. She was dressed in something which looked very much like a burqa, and the people could barely see her eyes. Her robe was decorated with a fanciful image of a bee. It soon became obvious that the female interpreter would be speaking for Deborah, and the male interpreter would be handling Samuel. Not only did that make sense gender-wise, it would allow access to single-sex gatherings where the delegates, particularly the women, could relax their modest dress restrictions. Samuel spoke, and the interpreter translated. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated." Everyone sat down as Samuel continued his speech. "We are gathered here today to put to rest over 2,000 years of hatred and bigotry, where the children of Israel have vied among themselves to determine which of them is the true heir to Abraham. Rest assured, faithful of the world, that you are all heirs to his tradition and have no reason to fight among yourselves. Why should Isaac and Ishmael be fighting when it is obvious that Abraham loves them both? Everyone clapped at that. I have only been here for a short time. However, it is obvious that all four of your sects are derived from the traditions I grew up with. You are all on the right track, and with a little help from my experience here and there, we may be able to reunite the children of Israel. Samuel held up his hands. Now, I freely admit that this is going to be difficult. There is a distinct possibility that despite our best efforts, we will not be able to end this bickering with one conference. Rest assured, however, that this conference will continue until we reach an acceptable compromise. Samuel's last remark drew a lot of surprised comments, many of them worried. Rather thought he knew why. Omega was intended as a summer camp, and the bunks were not winterized. Those cabins were not heated. By forcing them to stay until they reached a compromise, he was effectively giving them a deadline. Get the job done, or you'll get very cold. Oh, and since I'm a ghost, I don't need to worry about it. The prophet continued. If, at some point, it becomes obvious that there is going to be no way to actually unify the faiths, then the conference will continue until a tribunal is set up, which will ensure that the Abrahamic Civil War will never start again. This comment brought an ovation, and rather grunted approvingly. It seemed as if Samuel had finally realized he was probably in over his head here and needed to tone things down. Samuel looked up thoughtfully. I have often wondered what inspired me to stay around as a ghost after my time on Earth ended. All of our faiths teach that everything happens for a reason, including my decision to become a ghost. It appears now that the reason is obvious: to help this community from my future to resolve some major theological crises. Needless to say, God may work in mysterious ways, but my experience serves as proof that even the most trivial or inconsequential decision could be part of some divine plan. The clapping at this point was deafening. Samuel had to wait a good 20 seconds to conclude his address. Still looking up, he fell to his knees. God of Abraham, bless this gathering and provide us with your guidance. You have brought us all here for a reason, uniting my knowledge of ancient Israel with wisdom of modern theology. The fall of the statute of secrecy must have been your doing as well, as without it, I would never have been able to emerge and speak with these people. Samuel's face grew troubled. Lord, I am not Moses. I am not Abraham. I am just a ghost of a prophet who lived 3,000 years before this time. The more that I think about it, the more that I believe I am not worthy of this mission. Yet if that is your decision, I must be comforted by the fact that you, in your infinite wisdom, has chosen me. Samuel then stood up, and then uttered a blessing which Jewish households recognized all over the world. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehekyanu, W Kimanu, W Higianu Lasman Hayes. Blessed art thou, our Lord, King of the world, who kept us alive, sustained us, and allowed us to reach this momentous occasion. There was a resounding amen as the Jewish contingent exploded in cheers. Finally, Samuel looked back into the crowd. Let's get going.